Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're getting ready to start our last session of the day, continuing our developments in research and management on aquatic invasive species. Jen is back with us to take us through the rest of the afternoon. Before I pass it over to her, I'd just like to highlight an upcoming Invasive Species Center event. The Invasive Species Center is the secretariat for the International Conference on Aquatic Invasive Species, often referred to as ICASE. We're excited to announce that ICASE 2024 will be taking place in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, from May 12th to 16th of 2024. It'll be co-hosted by Dalhousie University and Nova Scotia's Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture, and you can visit the ICASE website to learn more. So Jenna, you can take it away from here and enjoy the rest of the session.
Thanks so much again, Mackenzie, and it's great to be back. If you weren't on the last session, my name's Jenna, and I'll be moderating this session on aquatic invasive species development and research and management. So we'll get started right away with my colleague, Colin Cassin, speaking to us on using new tools to answer old questions and other collaborative monitoring tools for multi-species impact. So I'll stop sharing and pass it to you, Colin.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much, Jenna. Let's see if we can get going here. Okay. All right, and thank you to Mackenzie and Maddie and Lauren Rogers for helping bring me in here. There we go. Okay, Jenna, you let me know if I'm on mute or I'm not sharing my screen, but I'm going to get going here. So good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you're viewing from. My name is Colin Cassin. I'm the policy manager at the Invasive Species Center, and here to talk to you today about actually kind of a great transition from Alan's presentation in the last session there about applications of using eDNA. And so I think both these presentations complement each other nicely. It gives me an opportunity to kind of move through some of the background on eDNA and talk mostly just about the application and what the Invasive Species Center and many of our partners, including the Green Shovels Collaborative, FOCA, the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, Ducks Unlimited Canada, a number of others are doing to try and take some of those tools that were discussed earlier and throughout a number of other presentations and just talk about application and kind of building programs around them. So here we go. So there's a couple of resources I wanted to plug. QR codes are now back in vogue, so you'll see them scattered throughout. And when you see them, it's just with respect to a reference link that I'm talking about. So you see the one at the bottom right there, and that's just going to link you into this fact sheet, which I think summarizes the background content well, and combined with Alan's presentation earlier, gives me an opportunity to go through here quickly, but just to kind of set the stage a little bit in case anybody wasn't in on the last presentation. Just a quick eDNA 101 with respect to aquatic invasive species monitoring. And eDNA in theory can be applied to monitor for any living organism. Using it for aquatic invasive species is particularly helpful and effective, just because of the universal solvent carrying around DNA from all kinds of taxa, whether we're looking at zebra mussels, aquatic plants, rusty crayfish, and everything in between. It's, at least on paper, an opportunity to be sampling for a wide taxonomic diversity. And as new technology emerges, lamping a perfect example, is becoming more and more cost effective, both in terms of the consumables and everything that's required to put together the kits to support the actual sample collection, also in terms of sample processing as well in the lab. So we're seeing it become more available, and also the type of equipment that's being used is more scalable, which is really the exciting piece for us. I'll talk about a few different programs that we've built that enable us to ship kits across Canada, and just using Canada Post and a $2 stamp. So a really effective way of doing this. No longer are we requiring pumps and decontamination and a logistically challenging process involved, I suppose, compared to some methods from years ago. And so it's a really interesting tool. Of course, it does have limitations. I just want to be realistic and talk about kind of scope and what it can and can't do, of course. And I think this fact sheet covers the content well. So just wanted to do a quick plug for that. The fact sheet's good. It kind of gives a very introductory explanation on what are the limitations of eDNA and what are the applicability and opportunities for us. And so just to try and summarize, I think where the technology is at in terms of integrating it into the program side of things, less on the technical processing of samples for the sake of this conversation, is some work that we've been trying to assess through the Green Shovels Collaborative, a partner of other organizations in addition to the Invasive Species Center. And for a quick and dirty version, I think, of where the conversation is at with eDNA, is that we've got, of course, lots of challenges. And so the need is there for a tool like an eDNA. We need to detect aquatic invasive species early. We need to be able to trigger to rapid response situations. The invasion curve tells us quite clearly that the earlier we can find, detect, and respond to invasive species, the more likely and more cost effective we're going to be at actually having a success story in eradication. And so, you know, some of the challenges, I think we all kind of see these and know these firsthand, unfortunately, but we'll gripe together about them. Things like low population density can be really difficult to detect pests. It also applies to low population density just from a national standard as well. For any participants coming from across the country, obviously lots of lakes out there, lots of land to survey. Fortunately, no shortage of new emerging pests. And so finding tools and techniques to be able to survey broad geographies can be a really effective tool that we're looking for. Obviously, a high quantity of lakes and lands that we're out there interested in monitoring. With respect to aquatic invasive species in particular, that cryptic nature that Alan cited a little bit earlier is a great example, and we've seen with some other aquatic invasive species conversations happening throughout the day. Finding some of these can be really, really challenging, especially when they're at low abundance. And of course, identification can be challenging for some taxa more than others, especially in circumstances where hybrids come into play. So just having those tools that can support those kinds of assessments and those kinds of detections is a really helpful approach. In terms of the opportunities that we're seeing with respect to using a new tool like an eDNA, we're seeing lots of people out there with interest in it. We've got an interested and engaged public on the topic of invasive species, and certainly an appetite for kind of engagement directly to be a part of the solution. Again, cost effectiveness and just some of these new technologies that are available to us, new techniques that are available to us, is a great opportunity and a great moment here. Turnaround time, as we saw with that LAMP technique a little bit earlier and some other techniques, we can get them turned around within a reasonable timeline that would trigger management and effective management and response on the ground. And also some new techniques such as metabarcoding, which was spoken to a little bit earlier, that can start to shift us away from the conversation about just surveying for a particular species of interest, a particular aquatic invasive species, and with the same sample or the same technique start to tell us information about what is the community composition like, and really give us that pathway into integrating our conversation around species losses or aquatic invasive species into broader conversations around biodiversity and species at risk, start collecting useful data outside of just the particular species of interest we may be focused in on. And as a potential solution here, we're looking for something that's scalable. This definitely checks that box. We're looking for community-led and opportunities to engage community science. eDNA and many of the newer eDNA technology approaches certainly give us that path. And like anything, of course, limitations exist. So it's not a replacement by any means for traditional monitoring, but it's an excellent supplementary tool that can be deployed in the right circumstances, perhaps in a broader scale approach that could then trigger, when appropriate, more traditional intensive monitoring. And we dream big in terms of the applications and opportunities to integrate this within programs. We look beyond just aquatic invasive species, some cool linkages into forest pests and other taxa as well. And so to structure the conversation today, what I wanted to do was talk at two scales. One, I think, just give you a couple examples of programs that the ISC and our number of partners have integrated eDNA and community science together at the provincial, or at least the kind of landscape scale. And so I wanted to speak to two different examples. This is the first of those two. It's a partnership that's led by Federation of Ontario Codgers Association and Invasive Species Center. And just to kind of quickly mock up the concept here for you. It's an aquatic invasive species monitoring program that has integrated eDNA in addition to other techniques for samples to be collected by Lake Association volunteers. And the focus of our eDNA elements of that program so far has been around zebra mussels and invasive mussels in particular, but it's a great framework and a great opportunity to integrate other species beyond just zebra mussels and invasive mussels. And in terms of sample size and scale, we're talking about 25 lakes in 2021, and at last replication of this program, we're looking at 29 lakes. So great opportunities for geographic scale, geographic coverage, and in theory, this is something that could easily be modeled in a wide geography, especially into Ontario. And we've seen a number of different activities through this program being done within eDNA sample collection and other techniques as well. So the beautiful model of this program is that it allowed for plankton toe samples to be collected in addition to eDNA samples. I just want to note there's a link, the QR code at the bottom there, to FOCA's iSample Ontario program page. You can check it out for next steps. And so to give you a quick version of the story of what's the process look like, just in terms of implementing this as a program, monitoring kits were distributed through FOCA to the Lake Association partners in the spring, shipped out, a number of supplies within there, and the eDNA kits in addition to those. Online training materials were provided. These are people who are using the eDNA protocol here who have very little past experience with this sort of work in terms of eDNA sample collection, most of which have none. They're provided with a quick video tutorial, like a 2-3 minute YouTube clip, and a written protocol as well. And these protocols were designed very much with community scientists in mind and people who don't have any experience collecting eDNA samples. And so for the first year especially, we're interested in this as a proof of concept model. Can people with no experience in eDNA sample collection and no formal lab technical training, can they collect good data for us on a wide geography? So those samples, once they've collected them, they're able to mail back just in a self-addressed and pre-stamped envelope ready to go. That's included in their sampling kit. Again, a $2 stamp can send this back to us to be able to support processing. And so the results were then provided to those local authorities, whether it's a provincial jurisdiction, whether it's a local jurisdiction, lake association, or the direct participants as well, as kind of a post effect of the program. And so we've done this program, as I showed there, with focus delivery on for 2 years. And so we started to learn some lessons and given a bit of a chance to look back. So what are we seeing? We're seeing a wide geographic coverage. We're able, in theory, to cover the entire province as long as there's a local partner ready to support and engage with us. We're seeing no previous training on the volunteers' perspective to be able to produce really useful data to us. So this is community science and really democratizing this process and bringing it to a wide array of participants all across the province. In terms of cost effectiveness, we're able to produce these kits for somewhere in the 20s, $20 per kit. And that's just in terms of the sample kit. Wouldn't include the sample processing fees, which are variable depending on which lab or which partner you can use to process these. But generally at a high level, I would argue that the equipment is highly cost effective. And it's an adaptable framework, as I said before. In terms of the species targets, zebra mussels was the initial species, but as long as the assay exists for a species and we can test it, whether it's metabarcoding qPCR as spoken to earlier or other techniques like LAMP, we have an adaptable framework that we think that it's the building blocks for a program that could be scaled and at a wide range and applied to any other species. Another example I wanted to speak to was a partnership we did with the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds and in Saskatchewan. And zebra mussels were also the target species for this project. And just to give a little bit of context for zebra mussels for those outside of the prairie region or maybe less familiar with the context of zebra mussels there, is that's very much the leading line in terms of Western expansion of zebra mussels. It's like a great graphic before about regions where zebra mussels are established, and this is generally the leading edge. And so they have a pretty robust watercraft inspection station in Saskatchewan, and they actually did a great webinar recently, just a couple weeks ago, for the Invasive Species Center. So I've got a QR code at the bottom there if you'd like to check that out after the fact. And just looking through some of the numbers that were presented in that webinar, they have a 5-year average where they're getting about on average less than 8 mussel-fouled watercraft per year. So suffice to say, this is very much a priority species and really in that early stage of high vigilance on detection. So yeah, a high priority species. And mussel monitoring programs are in place in addition to that watercraft inspection station program. And they utilize a number of partners, including the provincial government utilizes the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds, which is a not-for-profit organization. And they have local partners all across the province. And so we have so those are our local contacts that are using things like veliger sampling to be able to survey and sample their water bodies or lakes for veligers, for zebra mussels and invasive mussels. And so it's a great opportunity for us to try and partner together to again test that early concept of, can this work across a broad geographic scale? Can we utilize partners maybe with very limited previous experience in eDNA sample collection? And it depends on the watershed, but usually it's one sampler per water body generally. So, a perfect opportunity for us and avoiding contamination there. So in terms of the process, very similar model to what we talked about with the iSample Ontario program. The local partner would receive an eDNA kit sent to them in a mail. It's maybe a quarter full Ziploc freezer baggie, just to be quite transparent about the size and scale here. And so what they're able to do is take that and put it together with their other supplemental Veloger monitoring equipment and be able to collect and process a sample. They then process that eDNA sample into it's a small filter cartridge that's, again, just mailed back to us using a $2 Canada Post stamp and sent back to us. We connect with the private lab, bin them all together and provide them as a package. Those samples are then processed. And again, same as the iSample version, where all those results are passed back to local authorities at the province level and eventually to the local collection staff as well, or volunteers as well. And so again, we're 2 years in on that program as well. What have we learned so far? The method works. We're collecting useful data, good quality data. The outputs out of the lab give us, our controls are coming back where we would anticipate them to be. And again, it's enabling us to sample more than 40 lakes with eDNA and a newer technology that hasn't been utilized in this context before. So great outcome so far. And we've just started to use metabarcoding in terms of processing a subsample of those samples coming back. And again, just for those unfamiliar with it, a different technique to qPCR starts to answer questions about community composition and really starts to open the door for us to understand not just where zebra mussel is present or not, but what was the fish community like? Are there species at risk present in that water body? How diverse is that community? It's kind of a really interesting new collection of data that we're able to receive as outputs out of that. Of course, very expensive in terms of the processing fees, but an interesting technology that's certainly coming down in costs. So to shift from the provincial scale down to the local scale, I just wanted to speak quickly about a couple other programs that are happening. So we have a Welland European water chestnut eradication program we're a couple seasons in on here. And the Invasive Species Center's partnered together with the NPCA to be able to deliver most of the control and mapping work on this program. The Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, Ducks Unlimited Canada, and MNRF as the funding sponsor on the program are really critical. So I just want to emphasize the teamwork here as well. And there's visual surveys in place through that program. We've been having summer staff crews out there surveying visually the 33 kilometers of river, nearby waterways, and working with many local volunteers. So other efforts in play in terms of surveying and monitoring, and in terms of integrating eDNA, where we've been able to take that the last year, is last field season, we had our field techs, again, with no formal training in water sampling or eDNA data collection, being able to go out and sample farther afield, well outside of the known kind of visual survey area, to look in adjacent water bodies, places where we would certainly hope and expect not to find this plant, because it is a very regionally specific plant and not locally established by any means outside of the known stretch of the river we found it in. And so our hope this year is to be able to integrate the same technique with some of our volunteer partners in the area, local paddling clubs who are paddling adjacent water bodies regularly, local angling and hunting groups as well, to be able just to support the program when they're out on the water. Again, it's this idea of kind of catalyzed geography and increased geography there. So really excited to see some things like that in terms of scale and application. And the other kind of interesting, unique piece we've learned about this that's different from some of the other implementation programs is just the unique beast that is this river. It's a river that changes directional flow at times in the year, which can be really interesting and has important implications in terms of where the eDNA is moving from a source to a place, which influences where and how we're sampling. And also has some kind of interesting connection into local water bodies stories that we've been kind of really starting to become more aware of, I suppose, as well. Lastly,
Sorry,
yeah.
we're just doing the last minute. Sorry to
We're there?
interrupt.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I don't want to spill the beans. This last one is just to promote somebody else's presentation. So just to note, so we've got Rob McGowan coming up tomorrow at 3:40 actually. So he's going to talk about Red Horse Lake and some of the eDNA sampling there. Sorry, that's on Thursday at 3:40. So just wanted to do a quick hat tip towards that and some great lessons learned on that one. So with that in mind, just wanted to note some great future directions as I wrap here. And just talk about some of the exciting other places we can take this. We can continue to use this as a monitoring tool for AIS. Beyond AIS, there's some great other taxonomic, whether it's forest pests or other things, I spoke to a little bit before about community diversity and great opportunities with metabarcoding and telling us about biodiversity of communities we're sampling. And the last thing I wanted to plug was a kind of a great, interesting spin-off opportunity here. We've got some Niagara College students collecting and processing maple sap as they look for some forest pests and seeing if the method is viable in that space as well. So lots of great opportunity, and appreciate the interest and opportunity to speak to it. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Colin. Sorry to cut you off there. It's great stuff that you're talking about. So really appreciate the time. And I think we'll move on to our next speaker. Colin, if you don't mind just watching the Q&A, and if anybody has any questions for Colin about any of that work, feel free to pop it in the chat, and likewise for the rest of our presentations today. So our next speaker is Mike Piskur from the Great Lakes St. Lawrence governors and premiers, and he's going to be discussing some of the updates from the GSGP's efforts to protect the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence from AIS. So I'll pass it to you, Mike.
All right, thank you. I'm just sharing my screen here. Trust everybody can see that.
Looks good. Yep.
Okay. All right, thanks everyone. So I'm Mike Piskur with the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Governors and Premiers. I'm going to talk about some of the work we've been doing really in the last decade or so around protecting the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River from invasive species, from aquatic invasive species primarily. So a bit of background about the organization. It is a partnership of the governors of the 8 US states and the 2 Canadian premiers, Ontario and Quebec. The organization finds its roots in the early 1980s, so it's been around for about 40 years now, working on issues of mutual concern, environmental protection, and economic development. Originally started as a governors association just for the states. Over time, the provinces became more involved. In 2015, the 2 premiers became full members of the organization. So reflects the name change and kind of the scope of our work. And I apologize for the fire truck about to go down my street. As you see, our mission is growing the region's $6 trillion economy, protecting the world's greatest freshwater system with the Great Lakes. And I have some stats about the lakes and the river themselves. You see our chair, Governor Evers of Wisconsin, Vice Chair, Governor DeWine of Ohio. So we are a nonpartisan organization, work on a different range of issues. And like I said, invasive species has been a big focus area for us for about at least for the last 10 years or so. This is really quickly just to situate the basin. This great map that was put together by our friends at the Great Lakes Commission shows the watersheds for each of the 5 lakes and the river, which gets a little bit cut off there, but this is basically the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Basin. So a huge geographic area running from Minnesota in the west to New York in the east, and of course a footprint in 10 different jurisdictions across the international border. This is one that I usually use for more international audiences. I had it from a presentation from iCase from last year, but just had to leave it in to kind of give the scale of the lakes. This is set over Western Europe, of course. So, you know, lakes, maybe a little bit of a misnomer, maybe inland sea is a better way to think about them, but just gives you an idea of what we're talking about in terms of size here and the amount of water that they hold. So just a few stats about the lakes and the Great St. Lawrence River. It's about 20% of the world's surface freshwater, about 90% for the US. I think it's around 80 for US and Canada in terms of surface freshwater. Drinking water for more than 40 million people. A fishery that's been valued at more than $7 billion. That number is probably quite a bit higher as that is from a pretty old study at this point. But you know, gives you an idea of kind of what's at stake in terms of a commercial fishery, not to mention ecosystem health, recreation, all the great things that we love about the Great Lakes and we're trying to protect, and then those many miles or kilometers of beaches and coastline. So here's kind of the current situation. There's more than 180 AIS already present in the basin. So things like zebra and quagga mussels that Colin just talked about, a number of other species, Phragmites among them. Huge threat both economically and environmentally, hugely expensive for governments and others to deal with. I don't need to tell this audience about those harmful effects to ecosystems and native species. And it's really an ongoing battle against high-risk species. So what our work at GSGP has focused on is really keeping more invaders out. And I will say that number, that 180, I don't have the exact number in front of me. I want to say that There has not been a new introduction in about 15 years, something like that. So certainly there's been progress made on that front. Nevertheless, there are many species that are sort of banging at the door, so to speak. So our work has really been around taking aggressive action against high-risk AIS that pose a strong threat of invasion, promoting cooperation across borders and among different interest groups and others really coming together for this common cause. So one of the big pieces of our work that started in about 2013 was the idea of a least wanted list. And this was really kind of preemptive action going to the experts in the states and provinces and research institutions and elsewhere and really saying, okay, what are those high-risk AIS we need to be most concerned about in terms of keeping out, and where do we really need to focus our actions? So it started out with an idea of 10, nice clean number. After time, it became clear that that was not going to cover it, and we ended up with 16 high-risk AIS, and the names of those species will be on the next slide. Again, the idea here, and this is kind of an example of the way our work goes generally, it was sort of starting with this idea of a least wanted list, going then to the experts in the states and provinces and saying, okay, hey, what needs to be on this list? What does the science show? What do risk assessments show? Then taking that information back up to the kind of political elected official level in terms of governors and premiers and their staffs and saying, this is what the experts in all the states and provinces are saying, and this is what ought to be done about it. So we have sort of that top down and then bottom up process of really being able to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. So in about 10 years, there's been great progress. The states and provinces have taken collectively about 60 separate actions to prohibit the transfer or spread of these AIS. So that's obviously been great. In 2015, 4 of the species you see listed there were listed under the U.S. Lacey Act. So that's federal law governing the movement of invasive species. So obviously that's a great thing. And then in 2018, we added 5 new species to bring the total to 21. So on the next slide here, you can see that list, this nice graphic that we had put together, kind of showing, what's at stake here and why we're doing it. So, again, it's working together across borders. It's taking new actions to be able to keep these out. We have sort of a little chart that we put together to track progress. All the time we have new announcements. Most recently was from the state of Minnesota that listed, I believe, 5 new species under some legislation, some of the recent work in Ontario, of course. So kind of a steady drumbeat of progress on this as we work to keep these species out of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River. Another big accomplishment was work on a mutual aid agreement. And this was basically recognizing, going back to Colin's presentation on eDNA, when there originally was eDNA of being found of the invasive carp and others around the Great Lakes Basin, that set off alarm bells. There was a lot of panic and concern about making sure we're keeping it out. In terms of being able to cooperate across jurisdictions, there was a lot of confusion about what was needed in terms of being able to share equipment or resources or money or whatever was needed to deal with it. There were lawyers involved and it got very messy. So that's going back probably to 2009, 2010, something like that. So coming out of that, the idea was saying, hey, in the event of a situation like this happening again, what's needed to make sure that those problems are first of all, that we're aware of them. Secondly, that they can be dealt with so that in the event of some kind of outbreak, that the states and provinces can sort of spring into action and make sure they're working effectively and collaboratively. So the idea here is, you see, preventing the introduction spread, fostering mutual aid, again, whether that's people, equipment, whatever the case may be, our licenses being recognized across from one state to another, whatever the case may be, and really making sure that there's a clear line, a chain of communication and all of those good things. So this was signed among the 10 governors and premiers back in 2014. And, that's been a long time now. That's been better part of 10 years. However, in that time, we want to make sure that this sort of stays a living document, make sure that we're keeping it active. We've done some work to kind of review some of the protocols in it and make sure that they're set up to meet the needs of the future, and have gone through a couple of joint exercises to kind of implement it and keep that muscle memory active, if you will. So you can see here over the years, there's been a number of different exercises, mostly in person, as well as one during the pandemic that was virtual. But, the idea here is bringing everybody together to the table, including, not just states and provinces, but federal partners, others who are critical to the fight, and, different focus areas, different geographies in each of these. But the idea being, in the event of a discovery of invasive carp or some other high-risk species in the basin, what needs to be done to make sure we're dealing with those. So along those lines, those two pieces were completed, and then we were working with groups like the Great Lakes Fishery Commission and others across the region to really figure out what's the next gap, what's the next part of it that needs to be filled in to make sure that we're really being kind of comprehensive about protections for the region. And law enforcement became pretty obvious as the next area. So we have the mutual aid agreement, we have least wanted, we have this list of species to take actions against. But what happens if somebody has a prohibited AIS in the region or whatever the case may be? So as I mentioned, we worked with the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, their law enforcement committee, and basically went to the law enforcement officials in each state and province and said, what do you need? What would be making your job easier or to do your job better to help keep these invaders out of the region? So ultimately, what we fell on was this idea of the MOU on regional cooperative enforcement operations. Basically, it is an agreement. It started out among a couple of the states as well as the two federal governments. It was already existing sort of at the time, but the idea was, look, if we can just get all 10 of the states and provinces in this region to be party to that, that's going to be huge for the reasons you see here. Interjurisdictional investigations, across borders, making similar to the mutual aid agreement, making sure there's timely sharing of information, wildlife offenses, all of those sorts of things. So basically the idea was, look, just get the states and provinces on board along with the two federal agencies, and that is going to be a really strong protection on the law enforcement front, and really kind of bringing this along with the other two pieces I mentioned together to ensure that we're really working effectively to protect the region. So this is kind of a recap or a repeat a bit of the last one, but like I mentioned, it is all 10 of the states and provinces. I believe it was 2018 that this finally kind of came into force in terms of for all of the parties, and it does include the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Environment and Climate Change Canada. There actually was a possession of an invasive species in Wisconsin, I believe, sometime late last year, where the least wanted list and this law enforcement agreement were invoked to deal with that. So obviously great to have the agreement sort of in place and in theory, but to have a real world application where it's helping improve the situation is obviously what we're trying to do. So that was great to see. One more project I'll talk about here. This is actually work a collaborative project that involved the Invasive Species Center as well as a couple of other partners. And it was trying to think differently about funding and financing for AIS management and control, recognizing the huge cost, the ongoing fight to deal with species, and how can we bring different partners and different financing tools to try to meet some of these challenges. So there's a group called Quantified Ventures. Some of you might be aware of them. They've sort of pioneered work around outcomes-based financing, things like environmental impact bonds and pay for success approaches. They had not done it for AIS. So this was really kind of a pilot run of saying, hey, could we take this concept, apply it to invasive species, with the idea being that you're trying to really expand sort of the tent, if you will, of the different beneficiaries of something. So recognizing that if a state or provincial government is paying for a program, there's going to be a lot of people who benefit from the outcomes of that, but who themselves are not involved in any kind of transaction or financing standpoint. So the idea is, how do you bring in more potential payers / beneficiaries and sort of build a structure around that and trying to be really holistic around quantifying what the costs and benefits of these sort of programs are. So we looked at a couple of different AIS as a possible first run. Turned out that Phragmites made the most sense for a number of reasons. First of all, being pervasive across the region, some of the impacts it has on a broad range of different stakeholders. So as I mentioned, we spent a couple of years working on this, Invasive Species Center, Quantified Ventures, Nature's Conservancy of Canada, with the kind of end goal of how do you have a multi-year landscape integrated management program that's trying to accomplish what it's set up to do, but also in a way that's more cost effective. And like I said, bringing in some of those additional beneficiaries into it. So the initial cost benefit was very promising. This sort of sets up a opportunity for replication and scale. So definitely something that we're looking forward to continuing work on and finding different avenues to expand that work. And I know I'm getting a little short on time here. If there's any questions. So one last thing I'll talk about, very different from the other pieces, but critically important, and that is the Brandon Road Lock and Dam project. This is a huge infrastructure project. You can kind of get a sense where it is on the map there, southwest corner of Lake Michigan, near just outside of Chicago. And this is a major transit point for cargo barges and other ships like that, but also a huge vector for invasive species, particularly invasive carp. So this was identified by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers several years ago as kind of ground zero, at least on the U.S. side, in terms of a single place for fighting and keeping invasive carp out of the region, recognizing that the existing protections there were inadequate to the job, and really what does it take to get a sort of holistic new approach here in terms of a new lock and dam that's going to have all sorts of modern technologies to keep carp and other AIS out. So the governors and premiers have supported this project, of course, and have encouraged full federal funding from the U.S. government, including in a letter from the governors to the Congress about 2 years ago. And we continue to work on this. There's been great progress among some of the states and provinces working together with the U.S. federal government to get this project implemented, and one that's a big piece of work for us going forward as we want to make sure this project comes to fruition. So that was a lot of different stuff, but I'm going to leave it there. Happy to answer any questions. And of course, if anybody would like to learn more, you can go to gsgp.org and check out our AIS work. Of course, feel free to contact me with any questions or comments. And thanks to Invasive Species Center for the opportunity to talk, and appreciate everyone's time this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Mike. Really great to hear about the inter-jurisdictional work that's being done. We're just waiting on to see if any questions come through. In the meantime, I was, it was interesting to see the framing in terms of the top 10 least wanted. I was wondering, is this an effective kind of communications tool to influence social behaviors? Is that, framing it in the kind of more fun way, has that been effective for your group?
I certainly think so. I mean, that was part of it. Obviously the message is important, and that was kind of part of it. Is how do you make it sort of digestible to the public and others? The people who work on AIS every day get the importance. You don't need to sell them, but yeah, exactly. How do you sort of broaden the tent of people who understand, make it simple enough to care effectively? So I have a colleague on a different issue, kind of talks about like the mom test or the grandma test, right? Like, can you describe this to your grandmother in 1 minute in a way that they say, oh, I get it, and this is why you should work on it? So yeah, that certainly was kind of part of the thinking there.
For sure, thank you. And so just another question on binational exercises. Have you seen the need for mutual aid agreements in real life response situations?
It has not been necessarily invoked in terms of a real world response yet, which is a good thing. So, but yeah, we have joint exercises to sort of keep everything fresh. And, like I said, kind of make sure that everybody knows what to do in the situation. Yeah, as of yet, there hasn't been sort of a, actual drill, or I shouldn't say drill, but an actual emergency that needed to be dealt with. But, when the day comes, hopefully we will be prepared for it. That's the whole idea.
Absolutely, yeah, and hopefully the day doesn't come anytime soon. We can keep everybody out.
Agreed.
Thanks so much, Mike. If you don't mind just keeping an eye on the chat in case any questions come in. Otherwise, we really appreciate you speaking today. Thanks so much.
Yep, thank you very much.
Cheers. And so we'll move on to our next speaker. And I'm pleased to introduce Chuck Bargeron of the University of Georgia to present on EDMAPS. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I can get this going in a way that's taking me longer than it should.
Sure.
All right. Okay, I think that's got it there. So yeah, thank y'all very much. I'm Chuck Bargeron. I am the director for the Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health at the University of Georgia. And today I'm going to do a little bit of a different talk, focused on EdMaps, but sort of some lessons learned and how to fix some of the problems that come along with invasive species data. So that's kind of where my talk is. My title is Engaging the Public, Overcoming Politics, and Solving Technological Barriers of Invasive Species Data. And this is something that I have spent probably way too much time thinking about over the last few years. And I was trying to think about a different way to look at the problem that I deal with on an everyday basis. And that is, thinking and pulling together invasive species data and building tools to make that easier for everyone else to do that. And so as I was working on this, I found something that was called the pest analysis. And that when I think of pest, I normally think of, an insect or a disease that's going to cause a problem in a crop or an environment. But this is a completely different thing that is looking at a way of evaluating the political, economic, social, and technological factors that can impact a business or, in our case, an industry kind of area where we're working on something. And I thought that this was really an interesting way of looking at the problem. So I'm going to jump around from the order a little bit, but I want to think about this in terms of invasive species and invasive species data. And so from a technological side, in my mind, we've got a lot of tools available. That's what EdMaps is. It's a tool for allowing the user to report, track, and manage their invasive species data. And, that we built that through a website initially, a very simple reporting form. We built that into multiple smartphone apps that we've more recently integrated into the One EdMaps app. And then there's the EdMaps Pro app as well, to really make these tools as accessible and as easy to use as possible. We came up with the concepts of doing revisits to be able to track management over time and do that in the EdMaps Pro app. And then we built add-ons to that to be able to do more advanced data management, whether that be, tracking pesticide use through a tool we built called ISM Track. This being piloted in Alberta. It's the first Canadian province to use it, and it's being used in Minnesota and Wisconsin for about 5 years now. And so, adding more tools, private tools to help different organizations manage data, manage treatments, manage results, manage even labor hours on top of the EdMaps data. And we've worked with different modelers to build tools to analyze areas and determine priorities. So we built a tool called SIPA, which stands for Spatial Invasive Infestation Priority Analysis. And this was a tool that was originally developed by a group with the Nature Conservancy. And then we took it and through some of our partners, moved it online. And the state of Utah is using this tool to help rank their grant applications for how they determine how funding goes out for their noxious weed program. And now we're looking at ways, and I'm going to kind of jump back to this in a little bit, to build the gamification side of things. So we can look at better ways to interact with and bring the public in and keep them engaged in reporting different things. And all of that has made us think about what the different tools were and who the audience is. And so for casual users, for trained users, that's where the EdMaps app and the website come in. For the public, we've got I've Got One app, the Wild Spotter app, and pulling data in from my naturalist, having different ways to pull data in and give the public easy ways to report things and continuing to really think about who the public is and who we want to report things. For professionals, we've got, again, the EdMaps app and website, the EdMaps Pro app, the ISM Track app. and then having different data for researchers to pull the data down, whether it be downloads, whether it be expansion, modeling maps, and then and be able to pull data from what is the most complete source of invasive species data. But we've got to think about, as this next generation that grew up with an iPad and grew up with a smartphone from birth almost, how to get them to continue to use these tools and grow these tools. The economic one is always a tough one, and I'm going to kind of go through it quick. But I really wanted to think about that in the data standpoint as we were looking at this. And, you know, there's been some different publications. This was one that's cited a lot in the United States, the Pimentel data, you know, that says there was 120 billion per year in invasive species. And as you start looking into this data closer, you know, it's the best that we had at the time, but there's a lot of problems with how we usually in the profession of invasive species think about economics and the data in here. A more recent article has showed that North American wide, you know, we spend about 26 billion per year and have spent, you know, almost 1.26 trillion between 1960 and 2017. And this was again a more recent article as part of this larger project called Invasive, that is kind of run out of Europe and trying to get numbers for invasive species costs worldwide. And again, you start looking at this, and some of the species that really push those numbers really high are sometimes the species that a lot of time we don't talk about in some of these things because they're just kind of the pest species, the mosquitoes and the rats that, you know, are problems, and there's industries around those problems, but they're usually the things that don't get talked about a lot at invasive species meetings. Spotted lanternfly has been one that, you know, there's some really good graphics like this one that have come out to show the potential problems and, you know, in different areas to how big the industries are that this, you know, pest is going to affect. And I think doing more things like this as we talk about problems really helps. Now, the social side, you know, as soon as the spotted lanternfly, to go back to it, showed up in New York, then it made Saturday Night Live, and they did a skit on spotted lanternfly on Saturday Night Live, which was probably one of the biggest audiences we've had for an invasive species issue in a while. Now, they didn't get all the details right, and Jimmy Kimmel, I think, did something very similar when he was in New York and had somebody come out as the spotted lanternfly. But sometimes those crossovers and those awareness into the public are things that we're not doing a good enough job of with our problems to help elevate that to get the public more involved. You know, when Northern giant hornet was found in British Columbia and then in Washington, you know, I think every invasive species specialist around the country got phone calls around North America, got phone calls about, you know, that they were sure that they had this new hornet. And, you know, no, they didn't, but I'm glad and thank you for the interest. And it really goes back to what Washington has done with this see something, say something concept. If we can get more of that socially out there where, you know, just like other problems, if you see something, hey, you need to report it. If you see an insect you've never seen before, if you see an animal you've never seen before, if you see a fish you've never seen before, if you see a plant you've never seen before, let somebody know because it may be something new. But make sure at the same time the messaging is right. Juro spiders are something that started in Georgia, and nobody really knows what to do about them, because they're everywhere. We don't have the data yet on what their impacts are going to be. So now it's just, let's collect as much data about them as possible. So we'll have that. And if we do start seeing problems, then we can do that. And we've used some social media messaging to try to get that out. And it's amazing how, you know, some of the reach when the audience was really just Georgia, on a topic like this, when the public's talking about it, when there's a lot of interest, you know, those are the times to start using those examples to get people interested in reporting and get people interested in doing things. And we've definitely seen that down in Florida with the pythons and the Everglades. And because of that, there's a consistent messaging that's gone out over the past 15 years on, if you see something, report something, here's the website, here's the app, here's the telephone number to call, and keep that consistent anytime anything is found. And I don't know why there we go. And even, putting the back of the state vehicles with that information. So, people see it and you can get it out there, and it's free advertising. There's been some great examples of that in the Ontario area with the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, and some of the messaging they put out in terms of, what can I do, or is my space at risk, and let's find ways to engage different audiences about what they care about. And I think that is going to be really important as we move forward. From the political standpoint, politics, in whatever country you are as complicated as they can be, and they're more divisive and everything else now than ever. But sometimes in the scientific realm, where the politics get crazy is when everybody wants the trophy. And so when everybody wants the trophy, what happens is we end up recreating the wheel for no apparent reason. And just because I want to do it and I think I can do it better than anybody else, so I'm going to do my own thing. And I think that our problem with invasive species and our issue with things like data, it's not big enough. We're still trying to get everybody involved, and trying to recreate the wheel every time is definitely a mistake. We've got an effort in the United States right now focused on early detection and national rapid response, a national framework for early detection and rapid response. And in looking into that and thinking about, well, how long have we been talking about that? I go back and look, and there was a conceptual design for a national EDR system done 20 years ago, focused on invasive plants. And throughout time, there's, that framework came out in 2003, and then that led to systems such as the Invasive Plant Atlas of New England, which is now, which ultimately became part of EDMAPS. And just looking, it was interesting as I was doing this research, looking at this and seeing, okay, wow, there was another effort in 2007, and there was a workshop in 2008 around this, and then a publication came out in 2016 about a national framework for early detection and rapid response. And then there was a whole effort that was done with the Western Governors Association around early detection and rapid response, and a mobilization campaign that was done in 2020. And I went back to read the text on this mobilization campaign from just 3 years ago, and got a 404 because it's not a priority for the Western Governors Association anymore as people change. And so the data is not even available anymore. So I'm really hoping with some of the work that's being done by USGS and the federal government, U.S. federal government, that we're going to get it right this time. And I sure hope so, because, when you take a problem that's really big and you put a lot of money into it, if you don't succeed, it's hard to get that money again. And so, part of the reason why I think that this is important as we move forward is to look at things and go, we've got to make sure we do them right, because if we don't, we're never going to get that chance to fix them again. So going back to my topic, and I know I'm running close on time, overcoming the politics, that's a solvable thing. Overcoming the technological barriers of invasive species data, well, we can overcome the technological barriers of invasive species. We know how to kill these things. We know how to control them. We know how to push them back. As long as we work together, we can overcome the politics. So what's hard is engaging the public. I think that's the piece that we have all struggled with. and that we all need to find a solution for. And so one of the things we have built with the U.S. Forest Service is a program called Wild Spotter. And if you look at the tagline, it is mapping invasive species in America's wild places. And I'm hoping someday we're going to change that, and it's going to make it where we can, or just mapping invasive species in wild places, because I think this concept is what we can really push things forward on in the invasive species world, that people care about the places they love. And if we can protect those places that they love from these invasive species, then that's how we can start making a difference. And so with this Wild Spotter campaign that we've started, we've brought in a whole lot of partners. Some of them are traditional partners. Some of them are new partners that are outdoor recreation groups that we've not interacted as much with in the past. And that those are the people that are in the field that we need to connect with. And so we've got a project, a social media campaign that we're fixing to start in the next few months with an organization, a nonprofit organization called Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And we started talking to them, and we realized that their membership is exactly the kind of audience we need to get to. And so let's build that. Let's work with them and connect with their audience through social media, through their social media channels, to get them interested in Wild Spotter and what that concept of protecting your favorite places can do. And don't recreate the wheel. We brought in, from the beginning of this project, we brought in Play Clean Go. We brought in Clean Drain Dry. We brought in Don't Move Firewood. We brought in Don't Let It Loose. So we're not re-talking about prevention. We're using the campaigns that already exist to expand on prevention. And so, you know, we kind of, and I'm more on the technological side, but we figured out the biology part of this. We know how to do the biology part of invasive species. We learn more about it every day, and there's going to be a lot of, you know, in the next couple of days talking about the biology and solutions for the biological part of it. We can hire programmers to build tools, analyze data, and make things work. That we've got that figured out. What we need is more champions. And so that is how we engage the public, is to get people at the local level that can really push for change, you know, thinking about things differently, working with partners, bringing in non-traditional partners. And if you think about any different success story that we've talked about in this world, it all goes back to having that champion, having that ambassador who's on the ground and being the person that makes things happen. And so by doing that, we can engage the hunting community, we can engage the fishing community, we can engage just the community that cares about nature and get them interested in what we're doing, gardeners as well, so we can make that change. And so how I want to end this today, and hopefully I've got a little bit of time for questions, is let's think about that change, how it relates to invasive species data, but also how it relates to the invasive species field as a whole. And let's make a difference, because these species are only spreading more and more. And if we don't start making that difference and getting more people involved, then we're not going to be able to start this. So we are doing a short course this December around this topic, around this concept of invasives free and Wild Spotter, and really trying to help build the next generation of these champions. And so we will have more information coming on that very soon. We'll make sure it gets out into all the different channels, but the whole concept is to help train the next generation of champions. And so we're gonna do this. We're gonna bring in some experts on volunteer recruitment and community organization type things, and really over the course of a couple of 3 days, really train the next group of ambassadors, the next group of champions on spreading the word and helping to control these species. So I want to thank my team at UGA for making me look good and introduce y'all to our 2 new educational tools at the center at UGA, and that is the Argentine black and white tegu and the cane toad that were both found in South Georgia, and we kept in order to use to show people these species and the problems they cause, and that they're not cute and they're kind of scary looking when you get up close to them. So hopefully I'm good on time, and thank y'all for having me.
Thanks so much, Chuck. Some really great messages there at the end. So thank you for sharing those. Really appreciate your time. I think we will have to move on to the next presentation just in the interest of time. But if you don't mind just keeping an eye on the chat and responding to anything if anything comes in, that would be really great.
Thank you.
Thanks again.